Okay, so again with the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, there was a 1,000 rood and then a 3,000 rood because they got rid of the rood when they got rid of the 2002. The 3,000 rood was pretty much, I think, just like, but both roods. I think the roods were all good. The funny thing about the 1,000 roods, though, they were green logo. They seem to crack more. I used to see a lot more out at stores and stuff cracked 1,000 roods. And somebody could argue that guys with less money or whatever were hitting them harder and they broke. I think there was just more breakage with the 1,000s. I don't know if they were made as well or whatever. But so the roods, great cymbals. I saw a guy play an original. The original roods just said rood on them. It said Paiste somewhere on it, but it said rood. And then when they brought them back, it said Paiste rood, and then they changed it again. But in any case, but then there were also with the 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 change. There was also they had like a buffed cymbal, which they called in the 2000 series they called it sound reflections, and in the 3000 they called it reflector. And of course, then they borrowed the term reflector because they also made reflectors, sound formula reflectors. And the nature of the reflectors and sound reflection cymbals, they have a real tight lathing, almost like a giant beat. It's funny because I had, at that time, I'd seen some giant beats, and I went and I was buying some 2,000 sound reflections and 3,000 reflectors because to me it was kind of like a replacement for the giant beat kind of sound. I find personally that the giant beats, like that lathing, makes the crash last a little longer. Like when you listen to like No Quarter and stuff, in Zeppelin anyway, and a lot of stuff from like Zeppelin 4, I think, he's playing giant beats all over the place there. It's just a longer decay, which I used to, sometimes you got to chalk it up to compression or a limiter or, recording techniques. But again, the first giant beat I ever had that I got my hands on, I was shocked at how long the decay was. It was great. When I was really little, I would have hated that when I was a young kid, but just that psh, like that actual initial shimmer goes on forever. It's beautiful. Anyway, so I actually have a sound reflections here. The only thing that killed me about the sound reflection was the logo. Look at that logo. God, how 1980s can you get? Look at that. Sound reflections. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, but look at this. So you'll see it's very tight lathing, like a giant beat. But of course it's buffed, it's polished. But otherwise, to me, it's identical. Well, the bell's a little bigger. But to a giant beat. Great cymbal. This is a power crash. I had a crash one time, but this is a good cymbal. And even there, you can hear the crash goes on forever. That shimmer. Versus again the 505, which again is my favorite cymbal. That's it. Well, again, it's my favorite cymbal. I think the reason why I like them is the shimmer of this one goes on pretty long too. But take my word for it. Anyway, it's what I believe. The shimmer goes on longer with this lathing. Anyway, but here's the 2000 sound reflections, and they made a 3000 version of this cymbal, which just said reflector. It's a 3000 reflector. And the funny thing is they actually, before they did this, and I found this out firsthand, before they made the sound reflections and the reflectors, they actually made, because they made, I saw 2002s. It didn't say anything special on it, and you see them now. You'll see 2002s that are brilliant and lathe like this. But I got one from a guy in like 80. Well, I didn't get it from him in 80. I got it from him in maybe 93 or 4. But he got it. It's from the early 80s, and it's essentially a brilliant 2002. So it looks like a 2002 with the red logo and everything, but it looks just like this with the lathing, and it's polished. So I guess at one time, Paiste offered just brilliant 2002s, but didn't call them sound reflector or anything. But anyway, so then they got rid of the 1000s first. So then I have a catalog that has the 2000s in it, the 3000s, and the reissue, because they brought back the 2002s, God love them. So it has the 2000s, 2000 sound reflections, 3000s, 3000 reflectors, the 2002s, the Formula 602s, the Paiste signature, and the sound formula. And of course the brass tones, which was like a real crappy brass cymbal they introduced. By then, the 2000 or the 200s and the 400s were gone. I think those were discontinued before even the 1000s. And this, again, I would say, this catalog I think was from 91. And then I think they got rid of the 2000s. They hung on to the 3000s, I think, for a while. So the 2000s were probably gone by maybe 92, maybe, or 3. And it seems like they hang on to the 3000s a little longer than they just got rid of them. But they then came out with the 302s, the 402s, and the 502s. Now, originally the 302s were brass. The 402s, as I said in another video, were nickel silver. They kind of went back to a nickel silver symbol. And then the 502s, which were B8 bronze. So essentially then you had the 302s, the 402s, and the 502s, which sort of took the place of the 200s and the 400s. And then you had, and then they introduced the alpha about that time. And the alpha was at first was a beginner symbol, but then they upgraded it. And you can see then they gave the alpha the treatment too. You can't really see it with the symbol, but they gave it the more polished-y thing here. They brought the alpha up, and that's when Paiste to me started getting. I mean, suddenly there were lines coming out their ass. I mean, they had all these different lines. You know, you had like the alphas and then the 2000s, I remember the alphas and the 2000s and the 3000s occurred concurrently. This is kind of coming back to me because and then I called when I was talking to Paiste one time. I'm like, you guys have so many, especially lower middle lines. You know, why don't you just get rid of one of those and bring back the giant beats? You know, and again at the time, not because I had heard so many giant beats. It was really more of a Bonham thing. I just wanted the original Bonham symbol. But then, so then they had the alphas, and then the 302s, 402s, 502s, and then they came out with the plus. They switched those to plus, actually much later, which was a slightly different lathing. It was more of a giant beady kind of lathing, and more of a polished symbol. So not quite like this. Actually, no, the lathing actually was a little different. It was sort of ribbony. Anyway, you know what? I assure you, I have. This is so funny. I have a bag full of them. When I went to the store one day and I heard the 502 pluses, I was like, oh my gosh, those things, the decay on them lasts forever. This bag here is filled with them. You're going to have to take my word for it, folks. But here you go. I got jillions of these frickin' things. Because I loved them. I stocked up on them. So you can see, oh, I know what they did. They switched the technique. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so they went from sort of that ribbony technique to even this. So this doesn't even look like lathing. It almost looks like, do you see almost like that etched-in-y sort of thing? They did that for a while. And it was the plus. And then around that time after the alpha, they came up with like the 802s, and suddenly they had all these lines, B8 lines, below the 2002s. So you had like the 2000s, well, the 2000s were probably gone by then. Then they had the alphas and the 802s, and then the 3000s, but then the 3000s were gone, and then the 2002s, and then they had this, Anyway, this is a 502 plus. Now, to me, do you hear that? There's a very original giant beaty. The original giant beat sounded different a little bit. Not across the board. I don't mean to make it one of those things where like, oh, they're not the same. But the original giant beats had a different sound slightly, some of them. Like a more higher pitch, like, and a longer decay like that. My friend, again, Bob, was fortunate enough. I've seen a lot of giant beats come through my hands because of him, really. I mean, I've seen and played and felt maybe 10 20s, maybe even more, maybe like 10 18s. I personally owned at least 2 pairs of the 15-inch hats. I always felt like the original giant beat hats, they were only 15-inch side. They sucked. Although I will say that I now recall on eBay a pair of 14-inch giant beats somebody was selling. So when they went to Black Label, like 72, 73, 74, which they made 14-inch pairs, and God knows, maybe they made a 22-inch ride or whatever. But anyway, so that's the 502 pluses, and I want to say though, I think the 302, 402, 502 came about in the late 90s. And then of course now I'm not even that. Now they have the traditional, and then then the dimensions came out, and by that time I was just kind of I'd gotten older and I was married and I was sort of didn't pay too much attention. But I'll tell you, Paiste cymbals are great. I'm not at all affiliated with them. Although there was a time I was playing with the Zeppelin band that I did call him. I asked Andrew, I'm like, listen man, do you think I could get some kind of an endorsement? And he's like, no, dude. He didn't even remember who I was at this point because I hadn't talked to her. He's like, no, dude, there's so many Zeppelin bands out there. Sorry, I can't help you. And that makes perfect sense. I just didn't feel like spending $2,000 on a 38-inch symphonic gong, But anyway, but you know, I could go on forever and ever about Paiste cymbals. I'll tell you, I've had so many of them. But anyway, back to the giant. Oh, another thing about giant beats, the original giant beats, is some of them will say where it says "Made in Switzerland." I've seen a couple different two different stamps on giant beats. One looks just like the 602 without the Formula 602 across,